At 11 a.m. on November 16, 2019, the Emergency Dispatch Center in Gyeonggi Province received a distress call. The caller reported being unable to contact a close friend and sensing something was wrong. Shortly after, another call came in from the missing person's cousin, stating they had plans to meet that day but couldn't reach her. The missing person was a 30-year-old Vietnamese woman named Nguyen Bich Nan. Typically, when an adult of this age simply loses contact for a short period, it's not usually grounds for immediate investigation. However, police took a different approach in this case. First, Bich Nan was a foreigner without Korean citizenship, which made her disappearance particularly noteworthy. Was there a reason she would suddenly lose contact like this? But there was another strange detail. According to the person who filed the report, on the evening of the 15th, Bich Nan had stopped by this friend's house. During their conversation, she mentioned she would wake up early the next morning to go work in another area. But before leaving, she said something ominous. "If you can't contact me tomorrow, please remember to look for me." That statement sent chills down people's spines. Had Bich Nan somehow sensed what was about to happen to her? Therefore, the investigation team concluded that something had likely happened threatening her safety and immediately deployed forces to an apartment building in Yangju City, Gyeonggi Province, where Bich Nan was currently living. When they arrived, everything was as predicted. She was not in the apartment. Authorities thoroughly searched the entire surrounding area, from hallways and stairwells to nearby alleys, but found no trace of her. At this point, police began expanding the scope of the investigation, reviewing all security camera footage from the building and surrounding areas to track down clues. Then, among hours of continuous footage, a strange scene caught their attention, a video clip extracted from the parking lot camera outside the building. Around 6:30 a.m. on the 16th, the camera captured a man leaving the building, constantly looking around with an unusually vigilant and anxious demeanor. This suspicious behavior immediately drew special attention from the investigation team. After checking his identity, they confirmed the man in the video was Bich Nan's husband, a 55-year-old Korean man surnamed Shin. Mr. Shin's suspicious actions didn't stop there but continued with increasing frequency. About 10 minutes later, at 7:44 a.m., the camera again recorded him leaving the building once more. He walked back and forth around the parking area, his eyes constantly scanning as if monitoring or waiting for something. His gestures clearly showed tension, haste, and obvious unease, completely unlike someone going about normal morning activities. Police, noticing this series of abnormal behaviors, immediately focused on closely monitoring his every movement through security cameras. Then, just 20 minutes later, around 8 a.m., they discovered a decisive piece of footage. In the video, Mr. Shin appeared in the parking area, dragging something quite large, then carefully stuffing it into his car. Based on the size and vague shape of the object, police suspected it was very likely a body. However, at that point, everything remained just initial speculation. Clearly, the husband living with the victim, Mr. Shin, had become the most suspicious suspect in the case. From the shadowy actions captured on camera to his abnormal behavior throughout that morning, all signs led police to believe he was directly involved in Bich Nan's disappearance. Without hesitation, investigators immediately began tracking Mr. Shin's cell phone signal to determine his current location. After many hours of analyzing location data, around noon on November 17th at about 12 o'clock, the system detected his signal appearing in the Dongducheon city area of Gyeonggi Province. As soon as they obtained this crucial information, police urgently deployed a search team, following the trail under difficult conditions. After many hours of movement and investigation, they finally found Mr. Shin, who appeared quite calm at the time. Authorities requested his cooperation and asked him to accompany them to the police station for questioning. However, since there was no direct evidence proving he was a murderer, police could only temporarily bring him in for interrogation. Mr. Shin firmly denied any involvement in the case, insisting he knew nothing about his wife's whereabouts. But in reality, evidence gradually pointed to him like unavoidable puzzle pieces. Besides the security camera footage showing him appearing multiple times with suspicious behavior, police also made a fateful discovery when searching his car. Bloodstains appeared on the back seat, though in very small amounts. They were enough to make everything take a serious turn. Faced with mounting evidence, investigators shifted to more aggressive questioning, their voices rising and confrontational. "If you keep being stubborn like this, it will be very disadvantageous for you. Where is your wife? Where did you dump her?" At this point, Mr. Shin began showing signs of exhaustion and despair, his eyes empty like someone falling into a state of hopelessness. He sat silent for a long time, seemingly engaged in a fierce internal struggle between continuing to deny or confessing the truth. And then, as if completely giving up, he lowered his head, his voice hoarse and trembling as he uttered the first words marking a turning point in the interrogation. He said his wife was packing her luggage to prepare for work in Icheon, but during that process, they got into an argument, and Bichnan had injured him. He admitted that in uncontrollable anger, he had... The sentence stopped midway, left hanging, as if he himself didn't dare speak the rest. He continued saying his state of mind at that time was extremely chaotic, with feelings of guilt, fear, and despair intertwined. In a moment of weakness, he admitted thinking about ending it all, including his own life. After a period of tense silence, Mr. Shin finally broke down and confessed. His voice grew quieter, choked up, then admitted the location where he had dumped his wife's body. According to his statement, Bichnan's body was buried in a persimmon orchard in Wonju, North Jeolla Province, hundreds of miles away from Yangju where she had lived. Immediately after receiving this information, police deployed forces to the designated area. There, they discovered the victim's body had been hastily buried under a thin layer of soil, next to a handbag containing familiar personal items that Bichnan usually carried when going out. Through the investigation process, the truth gradually came to light. Mr. Shin had killed his wife in a fit of rage, then stuffed the body into the back seat of his car, drove the long distance to Wonju. There, he dumped the corpse in a desolate field, in the empty space, as if to bury his crime forever. When the confession ended, with no room left for denial, police immediately proceeded to arrest Mr. Shin, charging him with 2 serious crimes, murder and concealing a corpse. Now, to better understand the origin and relationship between these 2 people in this tragedy, let's look back at how their journey began. Mr. Shin and Bichnan were confirmed to have first met on November 3, 2018, through an international marriage brokerage company, a fairly common practice in South Korea in recent years. At that time, Mr. Shin was already over 50 years old, while Bichnan had just reached her 20s, meaning they had an age gap of 25 years, a very large generational divide. However, in the context of Korean society, such age gap marriages are not uncommon, especially in rural areas or sparsely populated regions. Many middle-aged or elderly men in rural areas face difficulties finding partners domestically due to limited living and economic conditions, so they often turn to international brokerage companies to marry young women from Southeast Asian countries. However, what made the relationship between Mr. Shin and Bichnan particularly unusual and surprising was the speed at which everything happened. Just one day after meeting, on November 4, 2018, they both went to Vietnam to hold a wedding ceremony. Getting married after knowing each other for only one day showed that everything was conducted extremely quickly, seemingly more within the pre-arranged plan of the international marriage brokerage company than a relationship built on true understanding. On December 13th of the same year, they officially registered their marriage in Vietnam, completing all legal procedures according to Vietnamese regulations. Then, around March of the following year, Mr. Shin returned to Korea first to continue the domestic marriage registration process. When the documents were confirmed valid, their relationship was recognized by the laws of both countries, and they officially became legal spouses. To better understand Bichnan's circumstances, there's an important detail that needs to be mentioned. Before marrying Mr. Shin, she had been married once in Vietnam and had a son. Meanwhile, Mr. Shin was a middle-aged Korean man, and this was his first marriage. This created a clear contrast. On one side was an experienced woman who had suffered many losses, and on the other was an older man seeking comfort and stability in his twilight years. Their wedding was held very quickly, taking place in Vietnam with the attendance of Bich Nan's family. Although the ceremony appeared warm on the surface, many relatives and friends of hers were surprised and worried. Since childhood, Bich Nan had been a smart, studious, gentle, and especially beautiful girl, always beloved in her hometown. Therefore, when she decided to marry a Korean man 25 years her senior, many people couldn't help but question and feel regret for her. From Bich Nan's perspective, it can be understood that her decision to marry stemmed not only from the desire to find love, but also from reality and the pressure of circumstances. As a woman who had divorced and had a son, she understood that in the eyes of many Korean men, this made her less attractive in brokered marriages. Therefore, when Mr. Shin, who proactively expressed his desire to marry her, appeared, Bich Nan saw it as a rare, stable opportunity to change her and her son's life. However, if you look closely at the nature of this relationship, feelings never seemed to be the main factor. From the beginning, their marriage carried more elements of a contract than a bond from the heart. They met through a brokerage company and decided to marry after just one day. This showed haste and lack of foundation to build a sustainable marital relationship. This lack of understanding of each other, combined with language barriers, cultural differences, and too large an age gap, caused this marriage to soon develop cracks that couldn't be mended. And indeed, subsequent events all showed their life together had never been normal. Even after completing legal marriage registration procedures, Bich Nan continued to stay in Vietnam for a long time, while Mr. Shin frequently traveled between Korea and Vietnam to handle related procedures and prepare housing for his wife. It could be said that although they were husband and wife on paper, in reality, the two lived separately, not yet truly beginning a real marriage. It wasn't until about 8 months after the wedding that Bich Nan officially came to Korea, bringing with her hopes for a new beginning in a foreign land. When she arrived, she began living with her husband in an apartment in Yangju City, Gyeonggi Province. However, hopes for a stable and happy life quickly shattered. If calculated by timeline, only 3 months after setting foot in Korea, she was murdered by her own husband. During the investigation, police collected and analyzed Kakao Talk messages between Mr. Shin and Bich Nan, and what was revealed from them exposed a picture full of contradictions and tension in their relationship. It turned out that even before Bich Nan came to Korea, the two had frequently argued via messages. The conversations showed many misunderstandings, conflicts, and coldness that gradually increased over time. From Bich Nan's perspective, the biggest problem lay in language barriers and cultural differences. She wasn't good at Korean, making communication extremely difficult. Every time she wanted to share feelings or explain something, she was often misunderstood, and this made even simple conversations easily turn into arguments. After Bich Nan officially came to Korea, the situation not only didn't improve but became worse. The two constantly argued, and the focus of conflicts gradually revolved around money issues. According to investigation results, money conflicts between Mr. Shin and Bich Nan were the biggest source leading to conflict in their marriage. Kakao Talk messages showed Bich Nan frequently asked her husband to send money, and each time, Mr. Shin would show anger, lose patience, and become hot-tempered. The frequency of money arguments increased over time, reflecting a married life full of tension and power imbalance. However, the victim's family, Bich Nan's, presented a completely different perspective. They asserted that her demanding money didn't stem from greed or unreasonable demands, but simply requesting basic living expenses as a wife. According to the family, financial control in the house was completely in Mr. Shin's hands, from personal spending to the smallest household expenses. Because of this, Bich Nan had almost no financial autonomy, forcing her to depend entirely on her husband to maintain daily life. The victim's family also said that, although she tried many times to discuss, explain, or request gently, Mr. Shin remained cold, indifferent, even completely ignoring his wife's legitimate requests. Through what was revealed during the investigation process, Mr. Shin's true portrait gradually emerged as an extremely stingy and miserly man, to the point of making married life suffocating. According to the victim Bich Nan's family, Mr. Shin tightly controlled every cent spent in the house, and even in the smallest matters, he didn't allow his wife to decide independently. They said that every time they went to the supermarket together, Mr. Shin always insisted on only buying the cheapest items, never agreeing to spend even a small extra amount. He constantly worried that his wife would spend wastefully, and therefore almost daily nagged and criticized Bitch Nan about money matters. The victim's family also recounted that even on Bitch Nan's birthday, Mr. Shin didn't buy her a cake or any gift. Something that seemed very normal in a marriage became a luxury for her. From the victim's family's perspective, this entire marriage was just a sophisticated scam orchestrated by Mr. Shin. They believed he deliberately showed initial concern and generosity to gain Bitch Nan's trust, then after marriage, revealed his true nature, a controlling, selfish, and cruel person. Looking back at the entire story, the truth about the origin of the marriage between Mr. Shin and Bitch Nan showed that everything was almost built on a fake foundation from the start. According to the profile Mr. Shin submitted to the International Marriage Brokerage Company, he was described as a middle-aged man with stable work, good income, and solid financial capability. The profile also emphasized that he lived responsibly, wanted to build a serious family, ideal characteristics that any woman looking for a stable marriage would easily be convinced by. Perhaps it was precisely these beautiful pieces of information that made Bitch Nan believe Mr. Shin was someone who could bring her and her son a better future. Therefore, their marriage happened so quickly it was abnormal, stemming more from trust and hope rather than real love. But the problem was, almost the entire profile of Mr. Shin was fake. In reality, he had no stable job, his income was unstable, and his economic condition was much more difficult than what he declared. When Bitch Nan arrived in Korea, she gradually realized this harsh truth. From then on, disappointment in Bitch Nan's heart began to grow. The initial lies, betrayed hopes, and Mr. Shin's coldness made their relationship increasingly distant and tense. In the early morning of November 16th, 2019, around 5:30 a.m., the atmosphere in the small apartment in Yangju, Gyeonggi Province, was no longer peaceful. That was precisely when the tragic incident occurred. According to testimony and collected evidence that morning, another fierce argument broke out between the couple. The conflict that had been building for many days seemed to have reached its peak. In anger, Bitch Nan declared she would leave the house, saying she would stay temporarily at her cousin's house in Icheon and would start looking for work to become independent. Those words struck Mr. Shin like a knife to the heart. When he saw his wife packing luggage, folding clothes, arranging personal items, he rushed over trying to stop her, begging her to stay. However, Bitch Nan had completely lost faith. She firmly rejected all attempts to hold her back. Right then, the argument escalated into conflict. Their voices grew louder and louder, sounds of shouting and collision echoing in the small apartment. In his rage, Mr. Shin began acting violently, making Bitch Nan extremely frightened. Sensing danger, she quickly grabbed her phone to record the entire incident. However, that action made Mr. Shin even more furious. In his rage, he lunged forward and snatched the phone from his wife's hand, causing everything to become chaotic. Bitch Nan was completely panicked. In desperation, she grabbed a kitchen knife from the sink, swinging it up reflexively to stop Mr. Shin's attack, accidentally causing his right thigh to be injured. In an instant, Mr. Shin's eyes turned blood red. Consumed by anger and losing his mind, he shouted, "I'll kill you!" Then snatched the knife Bitch Nan was holding and used it to stab her chest and abdomen multiple times. Although his wife had fallen, his anger still hadn't subsided, and he continued stabbing all over her body 17 more times. Bitch Nan ultimately died on the spot from excessive blood loss. After the tragic incident occurred, instead of calling police or emergency services, Mr. Shin immediately chose to conceal his crime. In a state of panic mixed with fear of being discovered, he began handling his wife's body coldly and calculatedly. First, he used large plastic bags to completely wrap Bitch Nan's body. Then, to prevent odor leakage or discovery, he wrapped another thick layer of cloth outside, trying to make the body package look like a bundle of ordinary belongings. When it was still not fully light, he went outside multiple times to observe the situation. Security cameras later captured him constantly looking around, surveying the apartment complex area, seemingly waiting for the right moment to take the body out without being discovered. Finally, when he saw the area was empty of passers-by, he hurriedly brought the body package along with his wife's handbag to the car, placing everything on the back seat. His first destination was a water reservoir near the house. There, he took Bichnan's phone, turned it off, then threw it into the reservoir, probably intending to erase any traces that could lead back to him. According to criminal experts' assessment, initially Mr. Shin may have planned to dump the body into the reservoir as well, but when he got there, he changed his decision. It's likely he was afraid the body would soon float up, or someone passing by would discover it, leading to the risk of being caught. Because of this, he changed direction, looking for another location to dispose of the body. After leaving the apartment complex in Yangju, Mr. Shin drove for many hours to reach Wanju around 4 p.m. that day. At that time, it was still light. When he arrived, Mr. Shin stopped at a small hardware store and bought a shovel. Then, he drove near a deserted persimmon orchard where hardly anyone passed by. He parked there, then sat waiting until it was completely dark. Around 7 p.m., he quietly dug a deep hole in the middle of the orchard, then placed Bichnan's body along with the handbag containing personal items down. After that, he covered it completely with soil, trying to erase all traces. When the case went to trial, both Korean society and the Vietnamese community were shocked. At the first trial, the court severely criticized Mr. Shin's actions, stating that using a knife to murder his young wife was an extremely cruel and condemnable act. The judicial panel also emphasized the pain of the victim's family, those in Vietnam who had to endure great loss when their daughter was murdered in a foreign land, unable to timely bid farewell or seek justice for their child. Therefore, the court determined that applying a heavy sentence was absolutely necessary to demonstrate the strictness of the law and deter society. In the end, Mr. Shin was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment for murder and concealing a corpse. However, many people believed this sentence was still too lenient compared to the crime he committed. At the appeal trial, the legal picture of the case suddenly shifted direction. Although the court still acknowledged the brutal and savage nature of the murder, the final verdict showed the court somewhat accepted the defense's arguments, thereby reducing Mr. Shin's sentence. In the verdict, the court pointed out that from the beginning of living together, the victim Bichnan had frequently requested money from her husband. These requests, according to the court, occurred continuously and caused considerable psychological pressure on Mr. Shin. In fact, less than a week after arriving in Korea, she had left home once. The court believed this clearly reflected the instability in the couple's marriage and also showed that Bichnan may not have really intended to commit long-term. The point the court emphasized most, and also most fiercely debated, was that Bichnan had signed a contract with the international marriage brokerage company before marriage. According to this contract, the mandatory cohabitation period between the couple was 3 months. Only when completing this deadline could she receive back the deposit money paid to the brokerage company. And the coincidence was, the day the murder occurred, November 16, 2019, was exactly 3 months from the day she arrived in Korea. The appeals court believed this time factor was not coincidental. According to the judicial panel's reasoning, it's very likely that after ending the marriage guarantee period, Bichnan had intended to leave Mr. Shin and freely seek a new life. Therefore, when Mr. Shin realized he was being used merely as a tool to help her immigrate and receive money back, he fell into a state of hurt, shame, and rage, leading to criminal behavior while losing emotional control. Based on this reasoning, the appeals court partially accepted the defendant's viewpoint. Therefore, Mr. Shin was ultimately reduced to 12 years imprisonment, and the pain remained only for those still living: Bichnan's relatives, the child orphaned of his mother, and all those still agonizing over the injustice of a verdict that wasn't truly satisfactory. This case once shocked public opinion, sparking fierce debate about the reality of international marriages. In South Korea, marriages between local men and foreign women, especially from Vietnam, are no longer rare. However, the fact that a momentous decision like marriage was conducted through brokerage companies made society begin raising painful questions about ethics and human rights. Because when love is replaced by contracts and people are seen as commodities, tragedy is almost inevitable. The second case today is also a case that occurred in South Korea. In the early morning of April 24th, 2013, around 5 a.m., when the sky over Gohung, Jeollanam-do province was still covered by thick darkness, an emergency call was suddenly transferred to the 119 emergency hotline. The woman's voice on the other end of the line rang out, trembling and panicked. "Someone fell off a bridge here. My younger sister was taking photos and fell down. Please dispatch quickly." But Mrs. Kim was in such a state of panic that she couldn't answer clearly. Fortunately, another woman standing nearby intervened to explain the location. The accident site was the Naro Bridge, the bridge leading to Naro Island in Gohung County, Jeollanam Province. The 119th Rescue Team quickly departed, but on their way to the scene, they were consumed with anxious thoughts. If it was that bridge, the height from the bridge deck to the bottom was about 65 feet, equivalent to a 6-story apartment building. Falling from this height would certainly cause fatal injuries. Not only would limbs be broken, but if someone fell head first, death could be instantaneous. Additionally, internal organ damage and spinal fractures were very common. Even if someone miraculously survived, could they endure the cold for an extended period? Moreover, the waters near Naro Bridge had quite strong currents. Although the rescue team would quickly arrive at the scene, in that brief time, the victim could have already drifted away or sunk to the bottom. The rescue team felt restless and anxious and soon arrived at the scene. Just as they had initially feared, there was no sign of the person needing rescue. Only a lone sneaker remained on one side of the bridge. She might have drifted away or sunk to the ocean floor. Immediately after, everything from patrol boats to divers was mobilized to conduct a wide area search. Due to the strong current, the search area was significantly expanded. The search continued throughout the entire day, but unfortunately yielded no results. Meanwhile, the reporter Mrs. Kim, 41, and her companion Mrs. Seo, 43, were anxiously monitoring the search. Their panicked expressions were very clear. Police asked them many detailed questions to understand how the accident had occurred. Who was the victim? What was their relationship with them? And why were all three present at the bridge so early in the morning? First, the person who fell was Ms. Choi Hyojin, 31 years old. Compared to the group of friends in their 40s, she was about 10 years younger, like a close sisterly relationship. All three lived in Gwangyang, Jeollanam Province, and regularly met for dinner or drinks. On the evening of the 23rd, around 7:30 p.m., Ms. Kim had called, "Hyojin, let's go eat," and suggested having dinner together. Since Hyojin had no plans, she happily agreed. When they arrived at the pre-arranged restaurant, Ms. Seo, another close friend, was already there. That day, the three ate together and drank rice wine. The drinking atmosphere became lively, and time had passed to 10 p.m. At this point, Mrs. Kim suggested, "Going home like this would be boring. There's a nice place near Gohung Naro. Let's go there to drink more and have fun." Although sudden, everyone enthusiastically agreed. Thus, all three arrived at a motel on Naro Island after midnight. They bought alcohol from a nearby convenience store and brought it back to their room. The entire group continued drinking and chatting vibrantly until 4:30 a.m. Initially planning to return home in the morning, all three were heavily intoxicated, their faces flushed red from alcohol. At this point, someone suggested, "Let's go outside and breathe some fresh air." The three left the motel and walked to the nearby Naro Bridge. The cool sea breeze helped them sober up faster. When they reached the middle of the bridge span, Hyojin enthusiastically said, "Sister, let's take a commemorative selfie," and suggested taking photos. Still in an intoxicated state, she staggered toward the bridge railing. "I'm taking the photo now, are you ready?" But at that exact moment, a sudden strong wind struck. Hyojin lost her balance and fell straight down below the bridge. Witnessing this horrific scene, Mrs. Kim and Mrs. Seo were extremely shocked, unable to contain their panicked screams. Mrs. Kim tried to regain her composure and immediately called 119 for emergency help. It was truly an accident that occurred too suddenly and unexpectedly. However, upon hearing this testimony, police felt there were unusual points. Around 5 a.m. when the accident occurred, it was still not completely light, and the atmosphere remained dark. Even nearby objects were difficult to identify clearly. In fact, in the photos Hyo-jin had taken, only the dim light of street lamps could be seen. Moreover, this was not a famous location or a familiar tourist destination. It also wasn't a place with special scenery worth photographing for memories. Of course, the three might have wanted to create their own personal, memorable moments. Next, police went to check the motel where all three claimed they had stayed overnight. In the room were empty alcohol bottles along with Hyo-jin's hair tie. It seemed they had indeed stayed there overnight. However, something created a strange feeling. The empty bottles and paper cups were arranged neatly, too orderly. This gave the impression that the scene had been deliberately staged, creating an inexplicable discomfort. Based on these suspicions, police decided to separate Mrs. Kim and Mrs. Seo to question them in detail about the actual situation at that time. If this was truly an accident, the testimonies of both women should have similar points. First, Mrs. Seo testified that Hyo-jin had staggered toward the railing and in a split second had fallen below the bridge. Conversely, Mrs. Kim appeared vague, saying she didn't remember the details very well. She explained that because everything happened so quickly combined with being drunk, her memory seemed hazy. But memories of that moment were extremely important. That was precisely when the accident occurred. Yet police didn't see any minimal effort from Mrs. Kim to try to recall. Police intuition told them she was hiding something. However, this was still just an intuitive feeling. First, they needed to learn about Ms. Choi Hyo-jin. She had divorced her husband a year earlier and was currently living alone. Her current job was as a cashier at a supermarket with quite limited income. To cover living expenses, she was forced to borrow money from banks and lending companies. Due to extremely high interest rates, her debt snowballed, ultimately reaching nearly 70 million won. When police conducted deeper investigation, they discovered that in such difficult financial circumstances, Hyo-jin had taken out 4 life insurance policies within the past year. This raised the question, how could someone who had no money for living expenses and had to borrow have sufficient ability to pay insurance premiums? Could this not be her own money? Police proceeded to check the insurance premium payment history, and their prediction was accurate. In reality, the insurance payment money didn't come from Hyo-jin's account at all, but from the account of a 34-year-old man named Shin. And this person was running a loan shark business in Suncheon City. When examining the records further, there was one notable detail. Exactly 3 months earlier, Hyo-jin's insurance beneficiary had been changed to Mr. Shin. In fact, the insurance company's security cameras had recorded Hyo-jin coming directly and signing the relevant documents. Therefore, procedurally, there were no problems whatsoever. However, the final results showed that when Hyo-jin went missing, the person who would benefit the most was Mr. Shin. Police cautiously summoned him and asked about this insurance relationship. Mr. Shin replied, "If my girlfriend doesn't have money, I can pay the insurance premiums. What's the problem? The insurance beneficiary became me because she has no family, that's all." This meant the two had a romantic relationship, and he naturally wanted to help, so he acted accordingly. But there were still suspicious elements. This person was a loan shark creditor, and Hyo-jin had many debts. Anyway, the fact that the two were dating was real. There would certainly be suspicious points. Police conducted investigations in various directions and finally found the crucial clue. A few days before Hyo-jin went missing, a Corando vehicle had appeared multiple times near Naro Bridge on security cameras. When police wondered, what is this Corando that appears so frequently, and proceeded to check the license plate, the owner was surprisingly Mr. Shin. Of course, this wasn't direct evidence of murder. However, it could be considered that he had conducted site reconnaissance before execution. But one important detail shouldn't be forgotten. When the incident occurred, the people present at the same time were Mrs. Kim and Mrs. Seo. Consider this. Loan shark creditor Shin could receive 430 million won in insurance money when Hyo-jin died. If he disguised everything as an accident to obtain that insurance money, having witnesses like these women would make everything much more favorable. However, there was still a part that hadn't been clearly resolved. Usually these women had close relationships with Hyojin. So what reason would cause these women to become accomplices in the crime? Could there be some relationship we didn't know about? Police focused on digging deeper into the relationship between these three people. Finally, they clarified the crucial connecting point. It turned out both Mrs. Kim and Mrs. Seo had borrowed tens of millions of won from loan shark creditor Shin. When investigating deeper, these three people had many meetings before the incident occurred. Security cameras had recorded them dining together at restaurants, and restaurant owners also testified they remembered them. This meant these three people might have formed a faction. Shin, the person who would benefit most from Hyojin's death, had offered some condition to the women who owed him money to draw them into the incident. That condition was very likely debt reduction. With this hypothesis, police proceeded to track the phone locations of all three people to see how they moved on the day the incident occurred. They also questioned transportation and pedestrians present around the area when the accident happened. They hoped to find some crucial clue that could support the hypothesis police had constructed. However, after nearly a month of meticulous investigation, they discovered no suspicious points. Although police intuition suggested Shin was the perpetrator, there was no concrete evidence. Not to mention murder, there wasn't even evidence showing he was connected to the bridge accident. Moreover, the body hadn't been found yet. In this situation, Shin made an unexpected move. He went directly to the Coast Guard station and requested to see the investigation files about his girlfriend. The reason given was that it was necessary to file an insurance compensation claim, but if he was the perpetrator, his real intention might have been to confirm how much the police had discovered. Police refused, saying, "Currently, disclosing information seems difficult." Shin even hired a lawyer and filed a complaint. These were very bold and brazen actions, as if challenging and mocking the police investigation. Nearly 2 months passed. The case still had no significant progress, but on June 7th, an incredible miracle occurred. Around 3 p.m. in Yeosu, Jeollanam Province, a severely decomposed female body was discovered in the rocks at Baekje Bridge, Hwajung District. After identifying the body, it was indeed Hyojin. Finally, police could see a small ray of hope, because now they could confirm whether she had truly had an accident or not. The autopsy results showed the cause of death was suffocation from strangulation and intentional murder. Moreover, from discovering this body, it became undeniably clear this was a murder case. Why? Because the body was carefully wrapped in curtain fabric and tightly bound with blue wire mesh. Not only that, to prevent it from floating to the surface, 2 construction bricks had been tied tightly to the body with rope. This was definitely an intentional murder. However, there was one more point of doubt that needed clarification. Why was Hyojin, who was supposedly to have fallen from Naro Bridge in Gohyung, discovered at distant Baekje Bridge in Yeosu? These 2 bridges were 28 miles apart. One might think the body had drifted with the current, but in reality, the current from Baekje Bridge in Yeosu actually flows toward Naro Bridge in Gohyung. Therefore, the hypothesis of drifting with the current was completely unreasonable. At this point, police suddenly realized the truth. From the beginning, everything had been a lie. The actual location where the murder occurred was not Naro Bridge, but had been Baekje Bridge from the start. What did this mean? Throughout this time, police had only believed the report and focused their search in the Gohyung Bridge area so they couldn't find the body. Thus, each clue was gradually resolved. Having found the body, police urgently arrested all 3 people, the 2 women Kim and Seo, along with the main perpetrator Shin, on charges of murder and body disposal. Shin said, terrible, and complied with the arrest. But Kim and Seo strongly denied the murder conspiracy. "We don't know anything about murder. Giving Hyojin sleeping pills was true, but after that we just handed her over to Shin." You gave her sleeping pills. But were these 2 really telling the truth? Right then, police comfortably smiled and showed the 2 women a video. Seeing it, Kim and Seo became silent. It was security camera footage from the day of the incident, showing the 2 getting into Shin's Corando and stopping at Baekje Bridge. Thus, their complicity was completely exposed. Fortunately, Shin also confessed, so the charges against the two women were clarified. So what actually happened that day? At the end of 2012, Hyo-jin first met loan shark creditor Shin through Ms. Seo's introduction. At that time, she had recently divorced her husband and was living alone. Financial hardship made her struggle through each day, so both mentally and economically she was in a state of exhaustion. Shin had targeted this weakness precisely. Every time he met Hyo-jin, he spent generously to win her affection. The two quickly became close and soon became lovers. Actually, all of this was part of the evil plan Shin had laid out. In fact, for some time before, he had been actively seeking a woman living alone with no family to rely on, because he wanted to execute an insurance fraud scheme through this woman. During this time, Seo had informed him that among the people she knew, there was Hyo-jin, who had just gone through divorce and was in debt. Shin immediately said, "Sister, then introduce me to that divorced woman." After meeting, he began approaching Hyo-jin purposefully. After becoming lovers, he began revealing his true nature. Shin told Hyo-jin, "You're in a lot of debt, aren't you? There's a very easy way to pay off all that debt," and proposed insurance fraud. The plan was to buy as many life insurance policies as possible under Hyo-jin's name, then report a fake disappearance. Hyo-jin had also agreed because living alone was too difficult, making her tempted by the promise of earning a lot of money. Thus, they enrolled in 4 life insurance contracts. However, when everything was proceeding according to plan, an unexpected obstacle appeared. Seo discovered their criminal plan and demanded to participate. At this point, main perpetrator Shin thought that when reporting Hyo-jin's fake disappearance, having a third-party witness would make everything smoother. Therefore, he drew Seo into the scheme, establishing a 3-person insurance fraud gang: Shin, Seo, and Hyo-jin. According to the agreement, when they got the insurance money, Hyo-jin herself would receive 50%, while Shin and Seo would each get 25%. But gradually, Shin began feeling dissatisfied. Although he was the one who planned it, the money coming to him was too little. Why should Hyo-jin get the largest share? He began thinking, "I'd rather kill her outright and monopolize all that money myself." Once he had this intention, he secretly discussed it with Seo. Being in debt to Shin, Seo agreed to disguise killing Hyo-jin as an accident in exchange for having all her debt erased. And here, they also drew in Kim, another acquaintance. Thus, Kim and Seo deliberately became close to Hyo-jin. At the same time, this was when the membership of the 3-person fraud gang began to change. On April 23rd, the two women called Hyo-jin to the restaurant. While happily eating and drinking together, when Hyo-jin went to the bathroom, they secretly put sleeping pills in the rice wine she was drinking. Hyo-jin continued drinking without any suspicion, and soon after her vision began to blur and she fell into unconsciousness. At 10:15 p.m., Shin, who had been waiting near the restaurant, arrived, and all 3 pretended to help Hyo-jin into the car as if she was just drunk. And right there, the 3 committed the brutal crime. At this point, Hyo-jin was in a completely immobile state. They placed a plastic bag over her face, intending to suffocate her. They had planned murder from the beginning, but because it was their first time, it wasn't like in movies. She didn't die immediately. They panicked and immediately changed methods, using cable ties they had prepared to strangle her neck. Hyo-jin couldn't resist and soon stopped breathing. Afterward, they used curtain fabric they had prepared to wrap the body and tied it tightly with wire mesh. They moved the body into the car trunk and drove around Yosu looking for a deserted place with no passers-by. Around 2:30 a.m. on the 24th, they parked at Baekja Island Pier in Yosu. Since it wasn't yet time for fishermen to go out to sea, this area was very deserted and quiet. Moreover, there were no streetlights, so the atmosphere was very dark. They hung 2 bricks on the body and threw it straight into the sea. But they didn't stop there. Now they had to create an alibi. Therefore, they drove toward Gohung, intending to pretend that 3 women had naturally traveled to Naro. Anticipating the police investigation would come, they deliberately chose accommodation without security cameras. They arranged empty bottles and cups in the room as if they had drunk a lot of alcohol. Finally, they deliberately left Hyojin's hair tie as evidence. Not only that, Kim and Seo also naturally left one of Hyojin's sneakers on Naro Bridge, completely staging the bridge fall situation. And soon after, with the attitude of, "Wait, let's act a bit scared," they began their performance and proceeded to make the report. At this time, Seo stood beside giving detailed instructions so Kim wouldn't make any mistakes. Truly spine-chilling. Thus, the entire incident was completely clarified. All three were prosecuted. Previously, Shin had confessed to police, but when appearing in court, he denied the charges. He presented the absurd argument that although he had strangled and thrown her into the sea, he didn't know this would lead to death. Because of such brazen attitude, even the courtroom audience couldn't contain their sighs and angry outcries. The results were announced. The trial court sentenced Shin to 30 years in prison, while Seo and Kim each received 20 years. However, the prosecution objected that this was such a thoroughly planned crime, yet the punishment was too light and immediately appealed. Going through appeals and retrials, finally in September 2014, the Supreme Court declared that the truth about complicity in this case had been fully proven. The court sentenced Shin to life imprisonment. However, Seo and Kim were considered for mitigation due to difficult economic circumstances, being tormented by debt, and being enticed and drawn in by Shin. That is, the court considered there was coercion and compulsion from Shin's side in this case. Moreover, these two were evaluated as showing some remorse, so they were reduced to 15 years in prison compared to the original trial sentence. And those are today's two cases. Thank you for following along, and see you in the next videos.